Welcome to the Iron State of Mind today. Our guest today is Matt Charney. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm good, Taj. How about yourself?
Doing very good. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
I figured it'd be good if we could just start off by, having you tell a little bit about your story and a little bit about yourself as well, and let the world know.
Yeah, well, obviously my story is a tragic ending because I ended up in talent acquisition, right? But, recycling to the back. So I actually, was another failed fine arts major who had an existential crisis and found recruiting. So I've been in this business for about 20 years, started out actually in-house building what's now called social recruiting and employer branding for companies like Disney and Warner Brothers. From there, I actually switched over the marketing side. So I've held marketing leadership roles at companies like Cornerstone On Demand, Allegis Group, and Monster. I started a website and a blog that was called Recruiting Daily. So I'm a partner in that. That's grown to be one of the largest recruiting-related sites in the world. And I am currently the general manager for talent acquisition at HR.com. So we have about 2 million global members, and my job is to oversee everything related to talent acquisition and hold it down for the recruiters against the generalists, right? So that's everything from virtual events, advisory boards, research, all the way to doing product demos, startup competitions, and advisory. So I'm lucky enough I get to work with both practitioners and vendors all day long and figure out really what's going on in the market.
Nice. So, general manager of talent acquisition at HR.com. Tell me a little bit about that. Like how exactly did you get to that title, and how's it been for you, and how long have you been in that role?
Yeah, well, the title we just kind of made up, right? Because, it was one of those things like you're at a bank, you're suddenly an EVP, running a new thing. So it made more sense than community leader, which I think was the official title. But weirdly enough, it's actually the very first ever job that I've had since I graduated that existed. So I vague booked something like about work. And my current boss, Debbie McGrath, who owns the company, was like, hey, I got this job. Sent me a job description. I'm like, oh, okay, this is perfect. So I've been there about 2 years now. And essentially, there's always been a lot of recruiters and a lot of TA-related content and engagement on HR.com, but never really put together in a way that, really served the community and also helped advance the conversation. So really my job has been focused on, I would say thought leadership, but I hate that term. So producing research reports. So we just put out one that I launched yesterday on the future of talent acquisition technology. Spoiler alert, I said AI too much. All the way to working with VCs to take a look at some of the startups in the space and then roll those out to our members, run focus groups. So basically, if it touches talent, it comes to me. And I'm lucky enough to be able to work with some of the coolest brands, I think, in the world on both their talent acquisition strategy and their talent technology strategy. So it's pretty awesome.
Sounds cool. For those that may not know, what is HR.com?
It's a great URL. That's what it is. 29 years. So the SEO value is booming. So HR.com actually has about 2 million members. So we're not like LinkedIn, but when it comes to HR, we are the largest broker, I guess maybe the correct word, of professional certifications for both SHRM and HRCI in the world. So people come to us generally for training and education, but we also have events, and we work a lot with various vendors to try to get their messaging and product out in front of our community. So, they've really made a commitment to growing out talent acquisition and recruiting as opposed to focusing on generalists where that's just a part of their job.
So since you've since you first started, I guess, within talent acquisition and recruiting, what would you say has changed from then till now?
Not enough, honestly. So I think what I've seen is a lot of complexity that's been added. And I think a lot of that has been driven by two things. One, we live in this very weird niche industry where it's actually the quote thought leaders or influencers or like independent analysts and consultants who drive what's going on rather than best practices being reflected in what people are doing. So I think that oftentimes uh, organizations tend to taste the dragon when it comes to TA, and we've been continuously finding ways to make the job harder, whether that's AI stack ranking resumes and doing a lot of the automation, video interviewing, things of that nature. Every single bit of complexity that we've added to the application process has taken away from the fact that at the end of the day, the thing that hasn't changed is the only job is to make a hire and to make your hiring manager happy. So the way that we have done that, though, has become a little bit more convoluted and complex, I think, because we're too clever for our own good.
So Matt, what are some industry trends that you're seeing, being as the general manager of talent acquisition at HR.com within the industry right now?
Well, so I think that when you break it out, you have sort of a few buckets of things. So one big trend is the obvious, the RPOs love to call it total talent. And that is the switching up of what's always been a strong preference for in-house W-2 employees to really looking at a much more blended mix of, freelancers, project hires, consultants, all that sort of thing. And really, I think that it's come from doing a job to getting the job done in terms of how organizations are staffing. So that obviously has implications for how talent's found. And how teams are put together. I find it to be much more focused on the work than on aptitude or culture fit, which was always sort of a vague concept. So there's certainly that. I would say in tandem with that, there is a rise of companies who, just due to the labor crunch that we've experienced the last few years, are really starting to try to adopt skills-based hiring, both in an attempt to increase diversity, but also to increase their talent pools. So that's a big change, particularly when it comes to upskilling and doing workforce management with existing employees. Obviously, people cannot stop talking about AI and automation, although, I think that it's a little bit of the cart before the horse, because most of us still don't have an applicant tracking system people can apply via mobile phone on. But, AI is great too. And then finally, I'm really starting to see the maturing of like talent analytics and talent intelligence as being core disciplines. So we have historically in TA not been great when it comes to anything quantitative. So we just ran a survey, for example, and only about 30% of the people who responded, all of whom run global TA functions, had confidence that they could accurately calculate either cost per hire or time to fill, both of which seem superficially to be pretty not only fundamental metrics, but not difficult to measure. So because it's hard as a cost center generally for recruiters to demonstrate not only their ROI, but also their business impact, and obviously as the specter of automation as well as potential workforce retraction starts to creep into the picture, I think that there's really a focus on proving demonstrable value to the bottom line in the business, as opposed to just looking at vanity or volume metrics and finally getting a hold of the data necessary to control that narrative, rather than either trusting a vendor or guesstimating.
I've always wondered AI and automation, being an impact within our industry, because I feel like what we do is so personal. Like, there's a personal component, and it's also an intimate component to what we do, where, you have to speak to individuals, and to make it like AI, I could see it being a huge impact within our industry if it does kind of overtake our industry. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think that first off, taking a step back, a lot of what we're calling AI is really just like machine learning and stack ranking technology. So stuff that's been in the market for a really long time. It's just now if I'm a VC or an investor, or, it's sexy. It's a sexy term since ChatGPT. But at the same time, a lot of these tools and technologies have been out there. Interestingly enough, though, again, I had that survey that just came out, and the biggest benefit that was seen in AI by leaders of talent was actually increased personalization throughout the process. And so I think, and number two, by the way, was being able to train recruiters on how to evaluate like the algorithm for fairness and transparency. So both of these are very people-centered things. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like we love to anthropomorphize artificial intelligence. Like AI can do this. Actually, AI can't do anything. It's based off of human input, and it just basically crunches numbers, gives you an output, right? So at the end of the day, AI is never going to make an offer, right? It's never going to counter. It's never going to ask for a change in title. It may help us make decisions, but ultimately it is going to come down to basically the affinity of a recruiter and a candidate, and timing and opportunity, same as always. What I do think it's going to have the chance to do is to really, I think, streamline a lot of the function. So particularly when it comes to things like sourcing, particularly when it comes to things like candidate notification, interview scheduling, all that crap that, takes up 90% of your day that people dislike. I think that starts to go away. What you're really going to see actually as a result is the rise of a much more, I would say, almost executive search experience for a lot of positions, just because the bandwidth is going to be available where you're not doing all that other stuff on the rec. You're really able to focus on delivering satisfaction to hiring managers and creating a more positive candidate experience. So on the whole, I think it's good. The only other point I want to make on this is that much like people thought the internet would eliminate jobs, there's a lot of talk about AI is going to replace recruiting. In fact, I believe that it's going to create a ton of jobs, and that it is just the next evolution in what we do, and that is matching the right people to the right job. It's going to be great to have help, but ultimately, I would say it's an art over a science, and that one that can't be replicated by an algorithm.
Absolutely. That's an interesting point. I know earlier, Matt, you spoke about skills-based hiring too. We're seeing that, because I'm obviously in the recruiting industry, we're seeing that with a lot of, companies that we support on a day-to-day basis that, they're doing a lot of skills-based hiring, like even aptitude test. They might do evaluations for certain programs that they utilize within their departments. So I guess for you, what are you seeing from a skills-based hiring standpoint? What does that look like for you guys?
So skills-based hiring is an interesting thing to me because it's a great concept. Theoretically, it's awesome. We're hiring people based off of aptitude rather than experience, right? However, what you're seeing is just a rise in assessments and automated, I would say, ways to either knock people in or knock people out, depending on, some proprietary model that an assessment company has, which ultimately you see a significant drop off in candidates, particularly at the experience level at the assessment process. But the most important thing is that individuals not only don't really have a good mastery of their skills, but I have yet to see an employer that really has a fundamental understanding of what skills they need and need to be filled. So while it's great in theory, I don't think we're even close to being there. I think even if we were, it's imperfect because 3 years ago, everyone would have been testing for your ability to code. And right now, let's just say that is not a skill that's very highly in demand. So demand planning, it would be nearly impossible. You'd also have to abandon both the resume and job description in order for this model to effectively work. And I can't see either of those things going away as much as we'd love them to.
When it comes to, I guess, like candidates or even, job seekers today, is there anything specifically that you see maybe job seekers lacking in today's employment market?
So I think that I think that if that depends really on the job seeker front. One thing I do think that a lot are lacking are just, I guess, an awareness of what happens when you apply for a job, the intricacies of recruiting and the hiring process. I think that definitely seems to leave like a lot to be desired, and recruiters have to hold a lot of hands just because people don't have a good understanding of why or how decisions are being made, and exactly what to expect once they submit an application. And so I think that that's obviously for me a giant thing. But broader than that, I think that certainly there is a mismatch between what the pandemic called non-essential and essential workers, right? So non-essential workers being, people generally with like virtual or hybrid jobs, white collar, highly skilled. Those roles are, out there, but the demand is really dropping. What we don't have, and where there's a huge deficit on the market, skills wise, is less of a skill and more of I guess, a willingness or even availability to work sort of those frontline essential jobs, particularly when you look at industries like retail, warehouse, light industrial, and all that. Those jobs are really, really hard to fill. I would rather almost get a search for like a director of foreign exchange with like very niche experience than I would an Amazon warehouse worker right now. So I think that that's where the giant mismatch goes, is we have an overly educated and overly compensated workforce as a general rule.
So currently right now, I mean, as the general manager of HR.com or general manager of talent acquisition at HR.com, sorry, how often are you responsible for hiring internal staff at your current company?
So as far as that goes, I do help participate in the process. Almost all of our hires are actually outside of the United States, so mainly in Bangalore and in Manila in the Philippines. And so I think that, from my perspective, that really mirrors a larger trend, which is this borderless workforce that's really distributed. So there's that. But I also have had the honor in my role, because I'm a resource to the community, of having worked with a lot of recruiters and HR leaders who've been in transition recently, working to find them new roles. And it's just amazing to see that even the people who are supposedly experts need a little bit of help there. And certainly that's probably the most rewarding part of my job. And I think I've helped 6 people this month land in, director level or higher roles. And so that to me is actually more rewarding than making my offshore hires, as it were.
Nice. So Matt, I guess with that in mind, I mean, what's the best piece of advice that you give, recruiters or HR professionals when they're maybe looking to go into like a director role or just even another role when they're interviewing?
Yeah, so I think that they make a lot of mistakes that candidates make as well, non-HR recruiting. And that is, there is a focus on the job and a focus on the role and responsibilities. And that really seems to be what drives both the conversation. People will apply for a role, and then if they get in process, they just talk about how qualified they are for the role. One thing I've definitely seen be extremely successful is just reciprocity. So people who not only are the most likely to land, but also the most likely to have an engaged network, are ones who are putting themselves out there helping people regularly. What does not work is, hey, I haven't talked to you for 4 years, but I'm going to send you a message via LinkedIn and ask for any job recommendations. That's not going to work. So I say keeping a constantly active network, and more importantly, focusing on fit and interpersonal chemistry between both the hiring manager and the recruiter, and say, here's why you'd want to have a beer with me, as opposed to here's why I am a slightly better fit for this job description that you have in front of you based off of my resume. So, I think it just comes down to affinity.
For your current staff that you have working right now at HR.com, do you have any specifics on how you're potentially retaining your staff at this time?
Yeah, so in terms of retention, I think that most of the people we hire, frankly, are coming in with not a lot of direct experience, but a lot of hunger. So really, a desire to both learn the industry as well as some of the critical business skills that those positions are going to demand. So we really look for people who are intellectually curious and who don't know it all. If somebody comes in and really has the supposition, like, done this before, seen it, I've seen this at 8 companies, well, then why are you here, right? And so I think that really speaks to retention, is the ability to really satiate that intellectual curiosity, give people the opportunity to not only have a little bit of autonomy in their work. So rather than measure by like metrics, measuring by projects completed and dimensional development. So growth of those skill sets, and also giving them the ability to work on projects that are interesting to them, even if it's not in their direct purview. People seem to respond really well to that. And the final thing is a very simple one, but this holds true for every company and every recruiter right now. We're a completely virtual company, which means our talent pool is global. And for a lot of our workers, they're probably not going to have that opportunity anywhere else, particularly when you start looking at sort of the developing nations, right? In India, that we can have our pick of workers because that's a luxury that almost no companies give. For example, easier and cheaper for us.
Right. Matt, it seems like, you spoke earlier about, all of your workers being remote. It seems like that's becoming more common within recruitment and HR. I'm sure at some point during your tenure or during your career, you were working, in an office doing HR recruitment, same way like you're doing it now at home. I mean, what's your take on, the remote aspect of, doing recruiting and HR work as opposed to being in an office?
So I think it's positives and it's negatives. I think obviously remote work makes a whole lot of sense just for the reasons that you're not limited by geography. So you truly have a global talent pool. I used to recruit in LA and at the studios, which are up in like Burbank, Orange County. Even though it's in the same metropolitan area, nobody's going to make that commute. So you have to knock off like half of your potential candidates. So really now you're able to not only draw upon a bigger talent pool, but you are also able to, I think, more objectively judge people based off of the video screen as opposed to, their look or their vibe otherwise. The one thing I do miss is the ability to have, the physical office sort of as a selling point. Like, hey, we have these cool basketball court, gym, whatever, like all those Google related perks that I enjoyed at the studio. Like, good luck trying to counter me after I've taken them for a ride in the Batmobile, which we used to do with candidates at Warner Brothers, right? But at the same time, I think when unilaterally, I want offers accepted. And I want them accepted quickly and cost efficiently. And so virtual really works for that. And as much as it loses out maybe on that weird company culture concept, I think most people would choose their couch over any company culture.
Agreed. I think we're seeing it a lot in our industry. A lot of people would rather the remote, especially maybe people that are actually even entering the workforce. We talk about like the college graduates, when I'm doing recruiting nowadays, and, even I speak to my recruiters, they always are hearing about job seekers wanting to work remote. So I'm just seeing, I guess for you, or maybe a question for you would be like, hey, how do you see that? Do you see that growing even more in the coming years, or do you see, people eventually going back to office spaces and going into offices more? What's your thoughts on that?
Even before the pandemic, I didn't understand the concept of like going to an office, right? Only because it's so full of distractions. I just read a study, but I think this has been like fairly consistent. The average person who commutes in spends $50 to $60 a day on meals, dry cleaning, everything adds up after a while. So not only does it take down your purchasing power, it also really, diminishes your work-life balance a little bit. So I can roll out of bed, be online 5 minutes later, as opposed to having to commute for an hour. I'm much more productive in that environment. But I think, when we look at the future, not only are technologies becoming much more advanced when it comes to facilitating the virtual work model, it's also going to be a default expectation. So when you talk about like the emerging workforce, I mean, they didn't even go to college largely in a traditional classroom setting, right? Due to pandemic related conditions. So I think that the default is really what is often called a ROE, which is a results only work environment. And I have yet to meet a company that can really comprehensively answer, why do I need to be at the office if there's not a physical project, physical or tactile products being produced.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. So obviously, like I mentioned earlier, general manager of talent acquisition at HR.com. One thing that I think a lot of people, I think even in recruiting and even in HR, don't get is they don't get like advice. They obviously get it probably from like the direct reports that they work with, or even their supervisors or managers, whatever it may be. For you, I mean, if there was one piece of advice that you'd be able to give a recruiter or an HR professional right now, what would you say that biggest piece of advice you could offer?
So I think again, there's one skill that the best recruiters like just have across the board, and that is just like curiosity and what L&D people call learning agility, right? So the ability to synthesize disparate pieces of information and kind of react on the fly, like that's essential for recruiting. So the one thing that I have found I love recruiting, and I still would encourage people to do, is just ask questions. Because like I have a film degree, right? I didn't take a day of business, and so what's awesome about recruiting is because of the dynamic, you can ask some of the most asinine questions of people in the world, and they will give you the answer. So really take the opportunity to ask those questions to get to know not only the business, but your clients and your customers. And in that case, those are hiring managers. So I think, always ask for information. Even if you don't need it, it's good to verify it, and it will help inform and shape your work, but also your propensity to do future work.
Great point, Matt. Growing up in this industry, when I first started, I was 20, and one of my mentors actually told me that, we're kind of similar to like the FBI in the case that we want to be inquisitive and we just want to ask questions, just to get to learn more about people. And, one thing that I know you can attest to this as well, is that everyone in recruiting, everybody that you speak to that you're looking to maybe get for a position or even obtain for a specific opening that you're recruiting on, they love talking about themselves. So, if they're a computer engineer, they're going to love to talk about what they do. So just asking the question, definitely will yield conversation. It will get you to learn more about the individual.
Yeah, and I would even caveat that. I think that people really don't like talking about themselves, which is foundationally one of the things I try to do in an interview and assessment. Is I know what you've done. I've seen a resume. I know how you present yourself. I've seen your LinkedIn profile. But what do you do when you're not coding? That's really where I think relationships are built, and where you can really do the most effective screening of, is this somebody I want to have to deal with for 8 hours a day?
Right, right. Yeah. It's all about building that relationship, I think, right? So I think that's where, to your point, you find out whether or not it's someone you want to work with and spend 8 hours of your day with. And then more importantly, it's like, hey, if we're trying to build an organization or build a team here that is going to grow and definitely look to achieve goals, then it's going to be with people that I could see myself doing it with, right?
Exactly. People who are confident, articulate, but also have the ability to see other people's visions and fit in. All that's like so important. It's hard to gauge, but as you know, having come up in the industry, like you hit a certain level where it becomes intuitive, right? Like, within 5 seconds, is this person going to be a fit or not? And then the rest is just kind of vamping, and that, to our earlier point, AI will never be able to do that, and that's every recruiter's greatest weapon.
Any feedback or any thing you can share with us regarding like challenges you experience within hiring or human resources today?
So yeah, there are a few. One is obviously HR seems to be a problem with hiring, and by that I mean there's a very, very, in my mind, big chasm, particularly at a corporate level, between your HR business partners or generalists and recruiters. I'd say the generalists tend to be very much risk averse, which is good, right? Because they're in charge of compliance. They tend to embrace the status quo. They're the ones who buy the amazing applicant tracking systems that everyone loves to hate, and institutes things like pay scales and so you have your traditionalists, and then you have largely talent acquisition, which loves to experiment, generally tends to embrace technology, and is really willing to never settle for the status quo, but keep trying to iteratively improve on what it is that they're doing. So I think like those two aspects, because you can't make a hire without both HR and a recruiter, that tension really has become a significant challenge, particularly when it comes to things like compensation, and particularly when it comes to internal mobility. So with compensation, it's fairly rare these days that people will do regular market studies and update salaries. So if you give me, even in the age of salary transparency, this is what we pay a level 4 with this many years of experience, it's like on a matrix. That's what you have to work with, as opposed to ever taking a read of the market and being able to be a little bit more competitive. So I think that's obviously a huge restraint, along with obviously company policies like time at the office, things of that nature. And then secondarily, I think when it comes to internal mobility, 90% of all hiring events don't happen externally. They happen because either there is somebody who is moving around either up or laterally within the company, or a referral, right? So that's about 90% of hiring events. And so what I think that the biggest challenge is making that process easier than applying for an external role, which it is at very few companies. Like if I want to apply for an external job, I will send in a resume. If I want to apply for an internal job, generally I have to call my HR person, verify my eligibility, fill out a form, give it to my manager, have them sign off, and then submit my resume. And until we can work around that, I think that the retention problem is going to continue to be an issue, as well as, again, not really understanding market wages and conditions. People will continue to get poached as long as something is being proactively done to keep them, and there is not.
Well, we're coming up on our time here, Matt. I just have one last question for you. You kind of maybe hit on it earlier when we were talking about, skills-based hiring and, hiring for character. But when you're hiring, is there anything specific that you look for in an individual?
Yeah, they have to be able to write. And so just like, I guess this is largely a focus of, I put out a lot of content, but at the end of the day, I learn a lot more about a person from their writing, which is so easy to locate now. Everyone has it on their LinkedIn or has like available samples than I do ever talking to them. So for me, the ability to express yourself persuasively via words, because that's everything from a submission to an offer letter. When you think about negotiation, like that is how I screen people, is persuasive writing abilities, good, bad, or indifferent. That's really going to be the thing that pushes most of the functions over the line.
Nice. And I guess maybe just a quick question that I had as you said that. Are you providing them with like skills based testing on writing, or are you providing them with certain scenarios? Are you saying, hey, like send me an email on how you would respond to this? Like how do you go about finding out whether or not someone's actually a suitable writer or not?
Well, so, interesting. So the one thing I just like say I hate that companies do is when they assign candidates work that they expect them to do for free. Right? Like, here's some projects, go do it. We'll see if you get the job. It's like, yo, here's my billable hour rate. So none of that. But I just asked for samples, and I'm very clear. It does not have to be related to anything recruiting related. Just send me in something that you wrote that you're proud of. And I've gotten everything from term papers to a love letter before, but ultimately that helps me gauge. If I have somebody say, oh, I don't really have anything, or is there anything you want me to write because I don't really have samples, then they're out, right? It's pretty simple.
Okay, perfect. Well, Matt, I mean, we're on our time here. I really appreciate you joining the Hiring State of Mind today. It was a pleasure having you today on today's episode. Any last minute thoughts for you? Anything that you wanted to share with us?
No, I would, again, just encourage everyone to go to hr.com, check it out. And also, thanks for having me, and keep making the good hires, Taj.
Absolutely, Matt. And I guess just so the world can know, if they wanted to reach out to you either through social platforms or even, just learn more about you as an individual, how can they reach you, Matt?
I would think the best way, probably for those of us who are still on Twitter, is at Matt Charney. DM me. Other than that, I'm assuming everyone listening to your show has LinkedIn, and I'm pretty easy to find. So feel free to drop me a note and say what's up.
Perfect, Matt. Well, thank you again for your time today. And I look forward to possibly having you on a future episode again.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Please like, subscribe on the channel. And definitely feel free to drop any comments in the comment section. We definitely want to try to build this page and build this community so this way we can get more guests just like Matt on the show.